imagine it's, I don't know, the 15th century. You live in this really small, isolated village.
Right. No electricity, very superstitious.
Exactly. And there is a neighbor down the road who only ever comes out at night. You catch a glimpse of them in the moonlight, and their skin is like severely scarred. It almost looks burned.
Like they've been in a fire.
Yeah. And their gums have receded, so their teeth look like these elongated, sharp fangs. And then you see the chamber pot they've emptied out back, and the waste inside is this deep, horrifying blood red.
Oh, wow. Yeah, if you're a villager back then, you're terrified.
You absolutely think this person is a monster. I mean, based on the folklore of the time, you'd think they were a creature of the night.
Right.
Feeding on the innocent.
Well, the real tragedy of that scenario is that the creature the village was fearing, and let's be real, probably hunting was actually just a human being.
Right.
A person suffering from a very real, completely misunderstood genetic mutation. I mean, we have centuries of Gothic literature and movies cementing the vampire into our nightmares.
Oh, totally.
But those specific traits, they didn't just come out of thin air.
And that is the part of our source material today that completely stopped me in my tracks. Because before modern medicine, before we had microscopes or, knew what a double helix was, people still had to explain these frightening symptoms.
They needed answers.
Right, and they didn't have the terminology for genetics, so they built a mythology around monsters instead. So in this deep dive, we are looking at a medical condition called porphyria.
The symptom overlap between this condition and the classic vampires it's so specific. Today, in the medical community, porphyria is actually often informally nicknamed the vampire disease.
Okay, let's unpack this because we really need to separate the medical facts from centuries of superstition. I was looking at the breakdown in the sources, and I got a bit lost right out of the gate.
It's complex, yeah.
It is, because it seems like porphyria isn't just one distinct disease. It looks like a whole cluster of issues. So how do we even define what this is?
Yeah, so we use porphyria as an umbrella term. It actually covers 8 different genetic disorders, and all of them essentially disrupt the body's red blood cells and their ability to function properly.
Okay, so it's all about the blood.
Exactly. And to understand the mechanics of that disruption, we really have to talk about a molecule called heme, H-E-M-E.
Right.
Every single person needs heme. It's a foundational, critical part of the hemoglobin in our blood. And hemoglobin is the protein that basically acts as a transport system.
Moving oxygen around, right?
Spot on. It grabs onto oxygen in your lungs and delivers it to every tissue in your body. Without heme, that entire transport system breaks down.
Wow.
So in a healthy body, you have these enzymes acting as like biological workers. And their whole job is to manufacture this heme through a very specific step-by-step process.
And the sources mention these other chemicals called porphyrins. Where do they fit into all this?
So porphyrins are the raw materials. The enzymes are supposed to take those porphyrins and synthesize them into heme.
Okay, that makes sense.
But in someone with porphyria, there is a genetic mutation that causes one of those essential enzymes to fail. So the synthesis process just gets blocked.
And when that happens, those raw materials, the porphyrins, they don't just magically disappear, do they?
No, they don't. They start building up in the body.
I'm picturing the body's blood production like a literal factory assembly line.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so you've got the enzymes working on the factory floor, taking the raw materials, the porphyrins, and assembling them into the final product, which is the heme. But because of this genetic disorder, a worker in the middle of the line just falls asleep at the switch. The assembly stops, but nobody turns off the machine that pumps out the raw materials.
That is a great way to look at it. And if those raw materials just keep coming and spilling over onto the factory floor, the body has to do something with them.
Right, they can't just sit there.
Exactly. They build up to toxic levels, which causes the heme that actually is produced to become unstable and degrade. The whole factory just grinds to a halt.
That sounds disastrous.
It is. All those leftover built-up porphyrins start wreaking havoc. And how that havoc presents itself really depends on which specific enzyme failed.
Because there are 8 different types, right?
Which dictates the type of porphyria a person has. We generally divide these 8 types into 2 main categories. The first one is acute porphyria.
Now, I usually associate the word acute with something sudden and severe, like an acute injury. Does this mean the disease attacks the body all at once?
Yeah, it manifests in sudden, severe episodes or attacks, and the symptoms are primarily internal and neurological.
Neurological,
Yeah,
okay.
so a patient experiencing an attack of acute porphyria is going to suffer from intense gastrointestinal upset, severe nausea, profound fatigue, and just debilitating abdominal pain.
That sounds awful.
It's incredibly painful. But the most significant symptom, especially when we were talking about the origins of folklore, is that these toxic porphyrin levels cause severe mental conditions.
Like what?
Including very vivid, terrifying hallucinations.
What's fascinating here is if we place that symptom into a historical context, the hallucinatory aspect of acute porphyria could easily make a medieval patient truly believe they were cursed.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about it. If you are living in the 15th century and suddenly you're violently ill, completely exhausted, and seeing supernatural visions, demons, or religious imagery that isn't actually there, your first thought isn't going to be, oh, I have an enzyme deficiency.
No. Not at all. The village priest is going to be called immediately, and the diagnosis is going to be demonic possession.
Right.
The mental toll of the acute form of this disease just perfectly aligns with the medieval idea of a supernatural curse. I mean, the patient themselves might even confess to being afflicted by the devil because they are genuinely seeing monstrous things.
That makes total sense for the psychological horror aspect, the madness, the visions, the sudden unexplainable illness. But when I think of acute porphyria explaining the mental toll, it doesn't quite explain the classic Hollywood vampire. Like, a hallucinating, nauseous person writhing in bed isn't exactly the suave-fanged creature lurking in a crypt that Bram Stoker wrote about.
True. The acute category really just explains the fear of the unseen curse. To see the physical monster, the traits that made it into the Dracula novels and the movies, we have to look at the second category of the disease.
Which is?
Cutaneous porphyria. Cutaneous relates to the skin, and this is where the physical transformation happens.
Yeah, reading through the symptoms of cutaneous porphyria in our sources was honestly chilling. It matches the vampire lore so perfectly.
It really does.
I mean, the most iconic weakness of the vampire is sunlight. If they step into the sun, they burn. And for someone with cutaneous porphyria, the built-up porphyrins in their skin react violently to ultraviolet light.
Exactly. The porphyrins absorb the light energy, which triggers a chemical reaction that creates these volatile oxygen molecules.
And what do those do?
These molecules essentially attack the surrounding tissue. So the patient's skin becomes incredibly itchy, painful, and swollen in a matter of minutes. It is a severe adverse effect.
Minutes? That fast?
Yes. Many patients experience blistering that is so profound, it looks exactly as if they've been badly burned in a fire. And this can happen after only a few minutes of exposure to direct daylight.
Man, if you lived in a medieval village and every time you stepped into the daylight, your skin literally blistered and burned, you would absolutely stop going out during the day.
You have to.
You would stay hidden in the dark behind closed shutters, and you'd only ever leave your house at night to avoid the agonizing pain.
And to your neighbors, who obviously don't understand the underlying biology, you simply become a sinister figure who hides from the light of God. You literally become a creature of the night.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though. If these people were so severely sensitive to sunlight that they blistered in minutes, and they were profoundly anemic from the lack of functioning heme, how were they physically wandering around at night terrorizing villages?
And that's a great question.
Right. Wouldn't they be completely bedridden and incredibly weak? The vampire myth usually involves a creature with supernatural strength, not someone struggling with a debilitating chronic illness.
Yeah, that is a crucial distinction to make. Porphyria is episodic. A patient isn't in a constant state of agonizing physical breakdown.
Oh, I see.
They experience periods of relative normalcy, followed by severe attacks triggered by environmental factors, diet, or stress.
So during a good period?
During a remission period, they might venture out at night to socialize or gather supplies. They'd still avoid the sun out of habit and self-preservation, of course.
And their appearance would still be pretty shocking.
Exactly. The scarring from previous blisters, the extreme paleness from avoiding the sun, it would be startling to the villagers. Over time, fear and rumor take that startling appearance and exaggerate it into the supernatural. A person just walking quietly at night to avoid pain becomes a monster prowling for victims.
And the physical appearance gets even more visually striking when you look at the mouth. I always wondered why vampires specifically had elongated teeth. Cutaneous porphyria actually changes the gum line, doesn't it?
It does. The repeated damage to the skin and tissues from those porphyrin reactions can cause severe receding of the gums.
Ouch.
Yeah, and as the gum tissue pulls back, the regular teeth are exposed far more than usual. The canines in particular look elongated, sharp, and very fang-like.
Add that to the final visual, the blood. The sources mention that massive buildup of porphyrins has to go somewhere, so the body tries to excrete them.
Right through the kidneys.
And when they pass through the urine, they turn as a deep, dark red. An uneducated villager seeing that waste would make a completely rational, though totally flawed, cause and effect deduction.
Yeah, if your waste look like massive amounts of blood, you must be consuming massive amounts of blood.
Exactly. But the terrifying irony here is that the medical professionals at the time actually validated that fear, didn't they?
They did. They saw these patients suffering from severe anemia, looking pale and weak. And the dominant medical theory for centuries was humorism.
The four humors, right?
Yes. The idea that the body was governed by four humors, including blood. If a patient was lacking vitality and their blood seemed weak, the prescribed medical treatment was to fortify it.
By drinking actual blood.
Yes.
I mean, the sources note that medieval doctors advised these patients to go to the local butcher and drink the fresh blood of a cow or a pig to raise their iron levels and regain their strength.
It sounds barbaric now, but it was standard advice.
Wait, so the medical cure actively forced these poor patients to act out the exact nightmare the villagers were terrified of?
Literally, yes. The doctor prescribes animal blood for anemia. The villagers see this night-dwelling, fang-toothed, scarred individual actively drinking blood.
That is just wild.
It becomes a horrific, self-fulfilling prophecy where the treatment for the disease just reinforces the mythology of the monster.
And the final puzzle piece is the garlic, a vampire's greatest weakness, besides the sun. I always thought garlic was just a random folk remedy, like putting a horseshoe over your door.
Most people do.
But it's deeply rooted in the biology of the disease. Garlic is incredibly high in sulfur.
It is. And for a patient with porphyria, consuming sulfur is a massive trigger. The chemicals in garlic actually stimulate the liver to produce even more of the enzymes involved in heme synthesis.
Which is the broken assembly line.
Right, so that just ramps up the production of porphyrins, causing a severe, painful attack of the disease.
So a patient would learn, through agonizing trial and error, that eating garlic or even just being around the strong oils and smell of it makes them violently ill.
Exactly. They would physically recoil if someone offered them a dish heavily seasoned with it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the absolute tragedy of the historical porphyria patient.
It's heartbreaking.
Every single action they take to survive is interpreted by society as proof of their monstrous nature. They hide from the sun to prevent their skin from burning. They drink animal blood because their doctor told them it would cure their anemia.
Right.
They avoid garlic because it triggers severe pain. And they are condemned and hunted for the exact things they are doing to try and stay alive.
It is profoundly sad. You are suffering from a painful, exhausting genetic disorder, and your entire community thinks you're a literal demon.
Yeah.
So we've mapped out how this genetic mutation created a 15th century monster in the minds of villagers. But what I found equally fascinating is that this disease didn't just stay in isolated rural areas.
No,
it actually found its way into the highest, most well-documented, wealthiest castles in all of Europe.
Because it's a genetic disorder, it travels along family lines. And European royalty and nobility were historically very selective about marriage.
To put it mildly.
Right. Often keeping bloodlines extremely close to consolidate power and wealth.
Which creates the perfect biological environment for a rare genetic disorder to flourish and concentrate. The sources confirm that porphyria is famously linked to several royal bloodlines.
It's a very well-known historical medical fact.
And this isn't just ancient speculation either. There was a modern case confirmed in 1968 involving a cousin of Queen Elizabeth II who was officially diagnosed with the disease.
Right. Having that modern, undeniable medical documentation proves that the genetic trait for porphyria is sitting right there in the British royal family tree.
That is crazy.
And knowing that, medical historians have started looking backward, conducting retrospective diagnoses on historical figures.
I was actually wondering how they do that. You can't exactly draw blood from someone who's been dead for 300 years. How do historians confidently diagnose a king with porphyria rather than just assuming he was eccentric or suffered from typical mental illness?
Well, they dig into the physical archives. They look at surviving letters, personal diaries, and most importantly, the meticulous logs kept by royal physicians.
Ah, the doctor's notes.
Exactly. The most famous example of this detective work surrounds King George III.
The monarch who lost the American colonies.
Yes. For decades, history just labeled him the Mad King and assumed he had schizophrenia or bipolar disorder.
But when modern researchers actually read the physician notes, they found details that pointed directly away from standard psychiatric illness and right toward acute porphyria.
Right. The physicians documented severe bouts of debilitating abdominal pain that always accompanied his mental confusion. Schizophrenia doesn't cause acute gastrointestinal distress.
Makes sense.
Furthermore, the physicians recorded something incredibly specific. During these attacks, the king's urine was reported to be dark red, or sometimes a strange bluish purple.
Wow.
Which is a hallmark sign of porphyrins oxidizing in the light.
So they matched the physical symptoms to the mental breakdown. The acute category of porphyria causes those exact neurological episodes, the profound hallucinations and mania triggered by the toxic buildup. And George III wasn't the only royal they suspect. The sources mention a lot of speculations surrounding Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yes, she suffered from similar bouts of severe illness throughout her life. Unexplained abdominal pain, lameness, and mental distress that strongly mirror the episodic attacks of porphyria.
So it was just quietly shaping history.
Yeah, by tracking the lineage and the specific combination of physical and mental symptoms recorded in historical documents, researchers map how the vampire disease was shaping the fate of empires from inside the palace walls.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When you talk about European castles, nobility, and vampires, you inevitably run into the ultimate inspiration for the entire legend.
Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad the Impaler, the historical prince of Wallachia in the 1400s, whose brutal reputation famously inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula. With the disease being so prevalent in Eastern European nobility, did Vlad the Impaler actually have porphyria?
It is a brilliant theory, and for a long time it was a very popular rumor, even among historians. It would neatly tie the medical reality and the literary myth into one perfect package.
It makes a great story.
It does. People assumed that because he was nobility in the right geographic area, and because his cruelty involved immense amounts of blood, he must have been suffering from the mental and physical degradation of porphyria.
But the sources are pretty definitive that this is where we have to draw a line between a good story and historical reality.
Yes. There is absolutely no historical evidence to support the theory that Vlad had porphyria.
None.
None. When researchers apply the same rigorous retrospective diagnosis techniques they used on King George III, Vlad's records come up empty. There are no contemporary accounts of him avoiding sunlight, suffering from skin blistering, having discolored urine, or experiencing episodic bouts of madness and abdominal pain.
So his connection to the vampire myth is purely based on his notorious cruelty.
Correct.
His reputation for impaling his enemies was so horrific that hundreds of years later, when Bram Stoker was looking for a historical name to attach to the local folklore of blood-drinking monsters, Vlad was just the scariest guy on record.
Precisely. Vlad provided the name and the brutal reputation, while the genetic reality of porphyria provided the physical traits of the monster. The fangs, the sunlight aversion, the garlic trigger.
They just mashed them together.
Right. Over centuries, human storytelling merged the terrifying medical reality of the disease with the historical cruelty of a warlord to create the ultimate villain.
It is wild to think that a genetic mutation passed down quietly through family trees inadvertently provided the blueprint for a monster that we still dress up as for Halloween.
It's pretty amazing.
But that raises an important question. Now that we have 21st century medicine and we've mapped the human genome, have we actually defeated the vampire disease? Like, is there a cure today?
Well, there is still no cure for porphyria. Because it is a fundamental error in the genetic code, we can't simply erase it.
Right.
However, the reality for patients today is vastly different than it was for the villagers in the 15th century. We can actively manage the disease.
The sources outline modern medications that can intervene in that broken assembly line we talked about earlier. There are treatments that successfully reduce the buildup of those toxic porphyrins.
Yes, and by lowering those levels, doctors can prevent the heme from degrading and stop the catastrophic cascade of symptoms before an attack even fully begins.
That's a game changer.
Absolutely. With proper medical intervention, diet management, and avoiding specific triggers, patients diagnosed with porphyria today can live relatively normal, healthy lives.
Wow.
The hallucinations, the severe blistering, the need for horrific medieval cures, those belong to the past.
Though reading through the modern management protocols, there is a lingering irony that I couldn't ignore.
Oh.
Yeah, even with all our advanced medications and our deep understanding of enzymes, the absolute best way to protect against a cutaneous porphyria attack is still reducing sun exposure.
Yeah, that is the lingering reality of the condition.
Hmm.
Even in the 21st century, management feeds slightly into those old stereotypes.
Because they still have to hide from the sun.
A patient with cutaneous porphyria still has to be incredibly vigilant about ultraviolet light. They often wear heavily protective clothing, avoid going out during peak daylight hours, and modify their environment to stay safe from the sun. The biological trigger hasn't changed, only our understanding of it has.
So what does this all mean? We take a step back and look at this journey from terrorized medieval villages to the modern medical management of a genetic disorder. Thankfully, it means we live in a world that fundamentally understands biology better.
Much better, thankfully.
We know that those suffering from porphyria aren't monsters to be feared, hunted, or ostracized. They're patients managing a complex chronic condition. And honestly, considering the history, anyone living with porphyria today can technically claim to be directly linked to the biological origins of the most legendary creature in pop culture, which is a pretty fascinating legacy.
It's a legacy that highlights the incredible power of human storytelling and how desperately we try to make sense of the unknown.
Yeah.
If centuries of terrifying, entrenched vampire legends, the fangs, the sunlight, the garlic, were actually just a society's attempt to explain a rare, misunderstood blood disorder, it leaves us with something very profound to consider.
Which is?
What modern-day myths, unexplainable phenomena, or marginalized conditions are we currently judging or fearing today, simply because our science hasn't quite caught up yet?
That is an incredible thought to leave on. Are we still looking for monsters in the dark just because we haven't fully illuminated the science behind them? That's definitely something to think about the next time you hear a bump in the night or read about a new, unexplained medical phenomenon. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.